This is WZRD Chicago 88.3 FM, The Wizard. We have with us today at Wizard Chief John Escalante, who's Chief of Police at Northeastern Illinois University. Welcome, Chief.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for joining us. First of all, I've always wanted to ask you, when did you decide to become a police officer, and what affected your decision?
I'll be honest with you. I know a lot of people have different reasons. For me, I was going to school part-time. I really wasn't sure what I wanted to do. I actually was originally a communications major. I actually wanted to be a radio, television, communications major. But I really wasn't sure what I wanted to do. And in '85, in the summer of 1985, I saw that the Chicago Police Department was announced a hiring exam. And a couple of friends of mine and I decided, you know what, let's just give it a try, and took the test. And then about a year later, in August of '86, I was hired. But it really was something I kind of fell into. I didn't even know whether or not I would stay and make it a career. As it turned out, I did. I spent 30 years working for the Chicago Police Department, but honestly kind of did it more like on a fluke.
So it wasn't that you came from a police family then? Did you have any relatives or anybody that you know that served as a police officer?
Yeah, no family. I did know some people, like growing up, my Little League baseball coach was a police officer. But when I was young, just a few kind of people like that I wouldn't say I was really close to, but that I knew were police officers, kind of, admired what they did. But like for me, like I said, it was more, I just wasn't sure what I wanted to do in life, and I thought, well, you know what, let me try this and, see where it takes me.
Did you, so was your Little League coach one of your role models?
A little bit, I would say, a little bit. I mean, you're right. I did have, I think, a few different role models growing up, one of which was my dad. I mean, he was involved in public service, but not as the police. He worked for the city of Chicago for what was then called the Department of Human Services, and he was in an executive management position for Human Services. He worked all over the city. I had the opportunity when I was younger to go with him a couple times to different job sites and saw a lot of the things he did for people that were maybe lower income people in public housing, people that were in need. So he definitely was one of my role models. Some of my teachers, I think, growing up that I really admire were role models. My Little League baseball coach, like I said, I think it's where the first person that I really knew that was a police officer, and I always found it kind of interesting that he had a very important job in terms of being the police, but that he still actually had time to help coach a bunch of Little Leaguers.
Do you think by the way, it is 10 a.m. and this is Wizard, WZRD Chicago 88.3 FM. Thank you for joining us. We have with us in the studio Chief John Escalante, Chief of Police at Northeastern Illinois University. For your Little League coach, would you say that coaching Little League was downtime for him? And if so, do you have instances of downtime? What would you do for your downtime while being a police officer?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think it was downtime for him, and I can say that because as I got older and had kids of my own, I did the same thing. I helped coach them in Little League, and yeah, it was a time to be able to step away from work and work responsibilities and just actually have fun working with kids. So for me, that was one of my stress relievers, giving me the opportunity to step away from work. For me also, I've always run. I've been a runner. I started running in high school when I was 14 years old, and still run to this day. That's always been for me another big stress reliever, just to get out and run, and it gives me a chance to clear my thoughts. I don't listen to music while I'm running. I just clear my thoughts while I'm running.
I know of another police officer. He used to work in my where I live in Belmont Cragen, and he was the neighborhood relations officer, and he loved to run as well.
Yeah, it's a good. I think for any job, especially if there's a little bit of stress, to just get out and burn off that stress by running. And like I said, for me, I don't even listen to music for a couple of reasons. One, for safety reasons. You know, when I run in the street and I want to hear if a car's coming up behind me, but also because, like I said, then running gives me the opportunity to think a little bit and to clear my head. So I don't listen to music when I run.
So you had role models and kind of mentors, but do you have mentees?
I think so. I do try to set a good example. For example, took my son to school today. He's going into his junior year of high school. I have two older kids, but taking Franklin to high school today, it was a first day of a band camp. He plays in the band and he's on the swim team, and this is his third year. And so I told him as I was dropping him off that to be a leader, you know, that there's going to be new kids, freshmen that are starting today in band, and that aren't going to know anybody there. And I told him, take the time to show them around, take the time to show them what you're going to be doing, and you know, be the kid that they could turn to in this first week and the weeks ahead when they need help or they're a little confused. So I think I've kind of done that myself. I've always tried to be the one that is accessible and that could try to help guide people in the right way.
I had that feeling when I met you as well. I felt that you were very accessible. So when you have new officers joining your team, no matter where you work, you kind of approach them and then welcome them as you advised Franklin?
Yeah, I mean,
if you have time.
Yeah, I mean, when you start out anywhere new, whether it's as a new student or you're starting a new job, there's always a little bit of fear and apprehension. And I know for my 30 years with the police department, every time I transferred to a new unit, or I was very fortunate to have been promoted up the ranks, every time I got a promotion and was starting out kind of new again, there's always a little bit of fear and apprehension. So it's always nice when someone takes the time to welcome you and to give you a little bit of the ins and outs of where you're at. And so yeah, here I try to do the same thing. I meet with each officer, want to get to know them a little bit, and I still tell people that I have an open door policy. I mean, when there's issues that need to be addressed by their immediate supervisor, I always tell them, hey, first start there, but if you don't feel you got a satisfactory response or you still have questions, then certainly you come to me. I always have an open door policy. I just want, not just for the employees, but for the students and staff here. I want not just me, but the officers to be accessible, and that you know you can approach them.
Well, I know that because I ran into you in the student union, and then I asked you, can you please interview with me and Wizard? And you said, yes, right away, just send me an email. That's what you told me.
Yeah, well, that's it. I mean, I think we do good work here, I really do, and I think sometimes the only way we can get that word out is to tell people ourselves, and it's not like we're patting ourselves on the back, but a lot of people I don't think realize a lot of the things that the University Police do here, and so sometimes we have to promote ourselves.
Can I ask you, what other units have you worked with at the Chicago Police Department?
A lot. I feel very blessed to have had the career that I did. It was 30 years. I started as a patrolman, worked in several districts throughout the city, spent about 4 years working in the narcotics unit doing narcotics investigations. Got promoted to sergeant. Same thing, worked in a couple different patrol districts, but then I was a sergeant in the detective division in bomb and arson. I was a sergeant in narcotics unit. Got promoted to lieutenant. Worked in the 25th district at Grandin Central while I was a lieutenant, but then I was able again to go back to the narcotics unit as a lieutenant, back to the bomb and arson unit as a lieutenant, and then I got promoted to what's called command staff position. I got promoted to the rank of commander. I was the commander of the 14th district, which is over at California and Shakespeare, which the communities there include Humboldt Park, Wicker Park, Bucktown, and then I got to go back, was the commander of the bomb and arson unit. Got promoted to patrol deputy chief. So I oversaw 9 of the city's 22 police districts, which was almost all of the districts up on the north side. Eventually got promoted to chief of detectives, so I oversaw the whole detective bureau. and then the first deputy superintendent, which is the number 2 person in the department, and then spent a few months as the interim police superintendent before I went back to my good friend Eddie Johnson became the superintendent, and then I went back to being the first deputy for a little while, and then I retired because this opportunity came up to come to Northeastern, and after 30 years I knew it was time to move on and try something different, but this was still in the only field that I knew, which was policing, and I really wanted to pursue this.
You enjoy it. You
Oh,
enjoy
yeah.
your work on it.
It'll be 3 years that I'll be here next month at
Oh,
Northeastern.
that's so fast. It goes by so fast.
Yep.
Do you have any unit that was especially inspiring to you? Which unit was the favorite of yours to work at, and why?
There was always a little bit of everywhere I went. I could take some positive memories. If I could go back and do one thing again that I particularly enjoyed, I would say going back to Grand and Central, the 25th district. For about a year and a half, I supervised a gang tactical team, and we really focused on gang-related crimes. The 25th district is a really big district, so it runs from Division up to Belmont, and from Central Park all the way west to the city limits. And so there was a lot to do there. And just the group of guys I worked with, we had a lot of fun. I enjoyed being their sergeant, but I also had a lot of fun working them. And I really felt like focusing on a lot of the gang issues that were there, I do believe we had an impact on some of that. So if I could go back and do one thing all over again, I probably would pick that.
Did you know Sergeant DeGraff?
Yeah. Sergeant DeGraff had, there were 2 gang teams, and he had one team and I had the other, yeah. So we worked together very closely.
Wow. Yeah, because that's the district where I live too.
Oh, okay.
So you must have known Officer April as well.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, yeah. He spent a lot of time working on North Avenue in particular, yeah.
Mm-hmm. What is your most important piece of advice for, let's say, your mentees or police officers, and why?
I would say 2 things. One, always be approachable to the community, and we are part of the community. I don't care whether it's Chicago or whether you're a police officer in Lincolnwood, Niles, Skokie, or here. I mean, you're part of that community, and so you need to be approachable. You need to be accessible, and I think that's important. The other thing for more on an individual basis is continue educating yourself, whether it's formally through college courses or informally through training or reading that you can do on your own. I constantly read. I'm constantly reading. I'm reading nonstop, and I think continuing to educate yourself is also important.
What are your favorite reading topics?
History. I like to read about history, any type of history, whether it's world history or U.S. history. History when it deals with leadership. I constantly read. I have a huge library at home.
Do you apply what you learn in leadership from history to your leadership positions, what they did wrong and what the leaders did very well?
Yes, no, absolutely, and that's one of the reasons why I like to read. That's one of the reasons why I continue, I would say, to self-educate myself, is because there's so much we could learn from the past, so much we could learn of what was done right, and how maybe we can help improve that, and so much to learn of mistakes that were made so that we don't repeat those mistakes.
Do you have any historical leader that you especially admire?
I don't think there's one in particular. There's really not. Some of the more recent books I read a couple books on Ulysses Grant, on Abraham Lincoln. Right now I'm actually reading a book about General James Doolittle from World War II. So I take a little bit of something from every book that I read, but honestly I don't think there's one kind of historical figure over the other that really stands out.
When you were Deputy Patrol Chief, what did you do and how were you able to apply your love for engagement, community engagement in that position?
So when I was patrol deputy chief, like I said, there's 22 police districts in the city of Chicago, and I had 9 of them. So I basically had all the north side districts, and that could be very challenging because they're very different. They're very different, each district. But the bottom line is, it was my responsibility to help come up with everything from crime strategies, to address the violence, to community policing strategies, and everything else in between. I really felt like one of the ways that you can have an impact on crime is to just kind of focus on community relations, because there's always going to be people that are reluctant to come forward as witnesses for various reasons, and a lot of times it's just fear. It's fear of retaliation if they come forward. And so you have to be able to have their trust, and the only way you can get their trust is to be out there and to engage the community in positive ways. So it was a very challenging position because, again, like I said, it was 9 districts, all of them very different, from the far west side all the way up to the lakefront, and all the way up north to the city limits. 9 different districts. It was challenging, but I really enjoyed it.
Probably very stressful, but very rewarding as well.
It could be stressful at times, and that was a job, honestly. It was 7 days a week, 365 days a year. I was always on call, so that's what kind of made it stressful. It was hard sometimes to do family things, and to even just to go out a few suburbs, because I always had to be looking at my phone. It was a 24/7, 365-day-a-week job. Yeah.
How does serving as a police officer differ from city to city?
Yeah, there's similarities in every city, and then there's differences. So even in Chicago, there's some parts of the city that unfortunately experience high levels of violence. Some parts, just it's been 20, 25, 30 years of struggling with the violence. And then there's other parts of this city that are relatively, I don't want to say crime-free, but low crime numbers, especially in terms of violence. But it's still all one city. And it's the same with the suburbs. They all present their own unique challenges, and different levels of crime, different levels of community support. But I would say the similarities are that you're there to serve and protect, no matter what community you serve, and that's the same here at Northeastern. There's probably more similarities than there are differences.
What is the ideal work environment for a police officer, and is that attainable?
Ideal work environment. I would say. I just being realistic, and you look at these very tragic shootings from this weekend, both in El Paso and Dayton. Here you have people shopping at Walmart in El Paso, and you have people out, just enjoying the evening at a nightclub in Dayton, and 2 places where you just don't think there's going to be violence, and yet, we had, almost 30 people killed in those 2 shootings, and just killed, and I can't remember the exact number of people shot from those 2 incidents, but it's unfortunate that I don't think we're ever going to live in a society where we're violence-free. But for a police officer, I think the ideal situation is to be proactive, to be doing what you can to minimize the violence, and at the same time to have as much community support as you can. And again, being realistic, I know there are not every police encounter is going to be positive, so I know there's always going to be people that are critical of the police, and that's certainly understandable. And should be expected, but one day I'd like to see, more positive interactions with the community than the negative ones.
Is there any class for community engagement in the police academy?
For officers that are in the academy that have been hired?
For both, for new recruits and for those that have been hired.
Yeah, so there is. There's actually a lot. The curriculum at the Chicago Police Academy, I'm going to give you a rough number, and I know I'm really close. The state currently requires about 500 hours of mandatory training for new officers. The city of Chicago, it's the city of Chicago probably offers about 900. So the city of Chicago is way over. And for our officers, they get about 700 hours. So we're even our own officers are about 200 hours over what the state requires. And those classes run everything from state law to use of force, patrol tactics, investigations, but there is a huge emphasis on community engagement, understanding the communities that you work in. For example, all brand new hires in the Chicago Police Department go through, I don't have the exact hours with me, but a huge percentage of the classes they take, they get educated on all the different communities in the city. So they'll get classes on the Mexican American community, the Puerto Rican community, the Cuban community, the Korean community, Chinese community, certainly different classes on the history of the African American community in Chicago, the Jewish community, you name it, and they're going to get a class on that. And the Holocaust Museum up in Skokie, Chicago Police brand new hires spend an entire day up there. And the focus really is to understand what happens when the police look the other way. So when they go to the Holocaust Museum, they understand what happened during World War II and how the Nazi regime under Hitler prosecuted and murdered, millions of members of the Jewish community, and the police there looked the other way. They turned a blind eye to all that was going on, and that's the whole purpose of new officers in the Chicago Police Academy spending the entire day at the Holocaust Museum, is to understand, if you don't do your job, if you turn a blind eye, if you look the other way, that's what happens. It's very impactful, very powerful.
When did these classes start? For a long time, or after the consent decree?
Oh no, this has been going on. Like for example, the Holocaust Museum. I would say that goes back roughly at least 10 or 12 years.
Okay.
The classes on learning about all the different communities go back to when I was in the academy. So when I was in the academy 33 years ago, I actually was assigned the Korean community in Chicago. And I actually went to the Korean consulate, got a lot of information, and had a guest speaker come in as part of my presentation from the Korean consulate to talk about how the Korean community views the police back in South Korea and how they view the police here in the United States, specifically Chicago. So that was 30 years ago. And that's why I said I know that's been going on since I was in the academy. They've only made it better. And like I said, 10 or 12 years ago, they actually started spending a day at the Holocaust Museum.
Now that is interesting. How is South Korean policing different from Chicago policing?
So when I did my presentation, and again, it was 33 years ago, it was very helpful because the guest speaker I had, and unfortunately I don't remember his name now, but he was from the Korean consulate, and he came in and talked to us about how there is a fear to a certain degree of South Koreans in the police. And actually, if you look at some of the stuff that has gone on recently, there's still some similarities. There was a lot of protests back then in 1986 in South Korea, and the way the police dealt with the protesters was tear gas, was opening up with fire hoses on them from fire trucks, using horses, mounted units to disperse the crowds. And so that had been for years. And so he talked to us about there was back then a certain distrust of the police because South Koreans who immigrated here, that was their only working knowledge, so to speak, of policing. And so he said there were some trust issues to overcome. And if you watch news recently and some of the protests that are going on, even recently in South Korea, that's apparently, unfortunately, still how they address some of those protests is tear gas and fire hoses.
How has community policing changed over the years? Maybe about when you started versus now?
There has been a pretty significant evolution. When I started, there certainly was a community policing component, but it was a really kind of small part of the department. Each district had I think you referenced it earlier, neighborhood relations
Yes.
office. But it was really small. It was really one sergeant and a couple police officers who were expected to go out and go to all the community meetings and be the main points of contact for non-emergency issues. And then around 1994, 1995, the department switched to more of a community policing-wide effort. It became known as CAPS, Chicago's Alternative Policing Strategy. And that put the emphasis on everyone at all ranks to be part of a community policing effort. I think it was successful for the first few years. Unfortunately, it got a little stale. And part of the reason it got stale was just the fact that they kept that title for so long. Chicago's Alternative Policing Strategy. That was the same title for the next 20 years. And I always asked, alternative to what? You know, I mean, it was no longer an alternative style of policing. It was the way we policed. And so now I would say within the last 3 years, and it actually began again before the consent decree, though I do think it's really taken it up a couple notches, a complete overhaul of just that title alone. And now it's just community policing. They got rid of Chicago's Alternative Policing Strategy because it really was an outdated term. But again, more of an emphasis on a department-wide effort at reaching out to the community and not keeping it within, one particular office within a district.
Did CAPS contribute anything to the consent decree in its formulation?
I know that when the Department of Justice came out and looked at the department, that was one of the things that they were critical of, which I actually, like I said, I agreed with. It was something that probably should have been revamped long before. Not that we were failing in our community policing efforts. I think the officers specifically assigned to each of the CAPS districts were doing an outstanding job. But after so many years, we kind of lost focus, and a lot of it fell back into that one office versus everyone out in the field recognizing they had to be part of the effort. So it is in the consent decree, some of the recommendations that the Department of Justice made towards, making more of a department-wide outreach to community policing.
Do you think these efforts could help include more of the marginalized populations to participate in CAPS? Because I have participated in a lot of CAPS meetings, and usually there aren't any marginalized population attendees at those meetings.
Yeah, that has been the unfortunate part. Like I said, over the last few years, where, like I said, I don't know if that's the right term to use when I said it got a little stale, but it did, and you saw a decrease in the number of attendees overall. You just weren't getting the same amount of people that were coming out to the regular monthly beat meetings. And like you said, marginalized population, who really is the people that the department needed to reach out to, the numbers were small.
Right.
And so that's, I think, going to be, or is part of that whole revitalization of the community policing effort, is to find as many different ways as possible to reach out to people. One of the things I was pushing before I left was just taking advantage of social media, that we could reach a lot of people and even, potentially have meetings through social media, because just about everyone, there was few exceptions, but just about everyone now had access to a smartphone, and that was maybe a way to look at, reaching people in terms of community policing efforts.
That sounds very reasonable. So engaging the community is hard, but what do you do in engaging students? Is engaging students a part of the job description for any NEIU police officer?
Yes. So we do try to be very active. We do all the new student orientations. Generally, Lieutenant Schultz, John Schultz, from our office will do those student orientations. He'll do the new students. He'll do transfer students. I'll do some as well. We do trainings for the Nest, for the Nest staff. I just did training for them last week, kind of like de-escalation type of training, because the RAs there, oftentimes will be dealing with an upset parent, an upset student, an upset visitor. So we try to give them tips and clues how to talk themselves or someone down from a potentially volatile situation. But we'll do, for example, there's new student employees over at the PE complex. So they have a lot of student employees. We'll be doing a training for them, I think later this week. But our webpage, we try to reach out to people through our webpage. We have a lot of safety tips on there. We have a lot of safety links on there. We have a very active Facebook page. And just if you notice when you walk the halls here, one of the places you'll quite often run into an officer, and I think that's where you and I bumped into each other, is in the student union area, right outside the bookstore. It's just because it's such a high traffic area. It's kind of become the place for officers to just kind of hang out when they're not doing something else. And that's always a good spot where you'll see them. And that's why we want them there, so that people will come up to them and talk to them, just like you came up to me the other day. Because it's a high traffic area. They're very visible there. And that's why we like them to just take a little time to spend a little time just hanging out there each day.
Yeah, I do see students talking with the police officers. And actually, I think I was in line. There was another student talking with you. And then I had to wait my turn.
Yeah, that's a good spot. People are always passing through there, and it's a good spot for us to be.
What is the most common question that you get from students?
I don't know if there is one. I mean, honestly, generally when they come up to one of the officers, they're generally looking for directions. And I'll tell you, the officers know this campus very well, because obviously this is where they work every day. So we like that they, if nothing else, they ask us that, and 99 out of 100 times we steer them in the right direction, because the officers know where they're going. And that one time they might not know, we help find where they need to go. But I don't know if there is one question. Other than that, most times they are, looking for directions. They're trying to find somewhere they're not familiar with.
And when you mentioned that you were doing the trainings for such as the NEST staff and for the PE complex new employees, what would be more prioritized, would you say? De-escalation or safety? Or is it just the two are equally important?
They're both equally important. So the new orientations focus on safety, and other orientations, like for student employees, like at the PE complex or over at the NEST, or for the student. Oh my gosh, I'm forgetting the term. The student. I don't want to say advisors, the student orientation leaders. I'm sorry. So I did training for them as well. Also, kind of more towards de-escalation. So it's depending on which student we're meeting with, whether they're new or transfer students coming here for the first time. That's more safety, or students that are student employees, which is more on de-escalation. But even at the NEST. 2 years ago, we opened up, I would call it a satellite office there, because we wanted to be visible to the residents. So we actually, in the office there, in the main office at the NEST, the very first desk when you walk in there, they've set aside for our officers to use. So our officers can do reports in there. They can check their emails in there. They can do their daily training. We have daily training online. They could do that in there. And that's another way we've tried to connect a little bit more with NEST residents, by actually having a little satellite office in there.
What are the hours for officers over there at the NEST?
Oh, it's infrequent. It's when they're in there and they have time. If they're not doing anything else, we encourage them then go in there and just, like I said, if you got to check their email or do their daily training bulletin, or if they can do any report there that they would do in our office. So if it's not a real serious report, just something they're, something that's not of a criminal nature, we tell them, well, then just do it there. And then they're visible, and then people can approach them there.
So do you actually encourage the officers to engage with the students?
Yes, but I'll be honest with you. I found even before I got here, they were very good about that. I've tried to really emphasize that since I've been here, but I have to give them credit for being accessible even before I got here. But I think they know that I try to be as accessible as possible. I take my turn every day, walking the campus a couple times a day for that specific reason, and they do the same. But they've always, I think, been accessible. I think they just know that they hear that message from me a lot. try to be as accessible and try to engage students as much as possible.
I ran into you a couple of times on the campus, and at first I thought you were going somewhere, but it might have been your daily walks just to engage the students because you seem to be at a leisurely pace. So that was what it was.
Yeah, if I have to go to a meeting on campus, I'll either leave early enough that I could walk for a little bit, or when the meeting is over, I take my time going back. So I use the meetings to actually use that as my time to actually walk the campus as well.
Is there anything challenging about serving as a police officer in a university?
No, it's still policing. It's just a different type of policing because we're very fortunate. This is a very safe campus, and so we're not dealing with the same levels of crime or criminal activity or gang activity that you go a couple miles in different directions from here, and unfortunately, you're going to see more crimes occurring. So we're a safe campus, but at the same time, we're still dealing on occasion with domestic disturbances, right? Because that does happen here. Suspicious persons, people will call for suspicious persons. The occasional theft because somebody has left their backpack or laptop lying around. So it's still policing. It's just a different type of policing, and it's more, like I said, we have the opportunity to be more of a community policing department here because we don't have to find the strategies to deal with high levels of crime.
Right. How often do you meet with Dr. Gloria Gibson, president of the Northeastern Illinois University, and is there a checklist of concerns that you must cover?
My meetings with the president are infrequent, but my voice, so to speak, to the president comes through Vice President Daniel Lopez, who I report to, and we meet on a regular basis. So if I have any concerns or issues that I think that need to be brought to the attention of the president, then he will take it from there. On occasion, President Gibson has reached out to me, for more specifics or has asked me to participate in meetings. But I don't have a regular meeting with her. I know she's very, very busy. I mean, to be the president of Northeastern Illinois with its other campuses as well, and having to deal not just with the university, but she's dealing with legislative issues downstate. She's very busy, so I think it's the way it works right now. My taking issues to Dr. Lopez and then bringing them to her. I think that's the right setup. But she does, when she needs to, she certainly reaches out to me. And if it was a real emergency, I wouldn't hesitate to reach out to her. She's been very good, very accessible.
There was a question that I missed. What is the worst work environment for a police officer, and how should an officer overcome that?
I think when you're dealing with high levels of crime, and like I said earlier, it's unfortunate. There are some districts in the city of Chicago that have dealt with high levels of crime for 25, 30 years. And when you're working in that district, and it's every day that you're seeing some sort of violence, it takes its toll on you mentally. Physically, maybe to some extent, but certainly mentally. And it's important that there are wellness programs in place for officers to be able to deal with that, to be able to vent with that, so that it's not coming out while they're working, while they're in the street, I mean. So that's a challenge. That really is. There's actually been a huge increase in the number of police suicides nationwide. Chicago certainly, but nationwide. A story just came out today that police suicides this year, year to date compared to last year, are up 24%. That's huge. That's huge. And a lot of that is because of the stress of seeing such negative things on a daily basis. And so that is a definite concern of mine, and it should be a concern of everyone's, finding the right officer wellness programs to keep them mentally healthy.
In other words, you're saying that the officers see so much of the worst side of society that they don't believe in the good side anymore, and they just give up? That
may be in some cases. I think it's different in each individual case, but certainly, yeah, when you're seeing violence day in and day out, every day you go to work, it can't help but take its toll on you. Like I said, for me and for those that don't have a stress relief, that's I think where the problem comes in. For me, it was always running. It was always just running, and though it's trailed off a little bit, like I said, I still run almost every day. It's certainly I don't have the same level of stress here that I did with the city, but I think that always helped me. But other people don't have that outlet, and it's important that we find the right outlet for officers so that they do stay mentally healthy.
Do you have a message for students about how they should help ensure their own safety?
I think there's some basic tips. First of all, we offer a mobile app. Northeastern has a mobile app that you can download from any smartphone, and it was it's designed for Northeastern, so it's the 911 cellular app. And then once you download it, and it's free, and once you download it, you just scroll down to Northeastern. There's probably 100 different colleges or universities. There's stuff specifically for Northeastern on there. There's a lot of great features on there. To check our webpage out, our university police webpage, it does offer safety tips on everything from bicycle safety to identity theft to domestic violence. It talks about the process of how to get an order of protection. To understand the resources that are here on campus, whether it's through us or student affairs or through the Title IX coordinator. A lot of it is just taking a few minutes to look at each individual webpage here at the university. That's actually how I learned a lot about the university when I got hired. Was I just went through each department's webpage, and there was a lot of stuff that I learned off of there. But yeah, there's a lot of basic safety tips we offer on our webpage that I think would be helpful to any student or even staff members to take a look at every once in a while.
You mentioned ID theft. Is it okay if you talk about that? Is there any ID theft at Northeastern?
We have had some cases, fortunately not a lot. There's been a few, but even in our police station, we have some nice pamphlets on identity theft, how to protect yourself from identity theft. We have that on our webpage, but probably not as in detail as the pamphlets that we have. So if you were to come into our police station, right when you walk in, we have all kinds of safety brochures and pamphlets that are there. Everything, like I said, from identity theft to stalking to drug-related information. There's a lot of stuff that whether you look at our webpage or stop in the office, that I think would help anyone.
How has your decision to be chief of police at Northeastern Illinois University been a good one?
It's been good, I think, in a lot of different ways. Professionally for the university, like I said, I was impressed when I got here as to the professionalism of this department. But I hope, and I think I've helped build on that. I had a very good working relationship with the city, obviously, and a lot of our suburban neighbors. So I know that I've been able to bring a lot of training here that maybe they wouldn't have had the opportunity to take. So, for example, crisis intervention training, which is a 40-hour class, certification on dealing with individuals that may be in need of mental health treatment and services versus, an arrest situation. That was a voluntary basis training, and all of our officers volunteered for that. And we were able to get them through the training that the Chicago Police Department and their partners, their outside partners, put together. A 40-hour certification, that's huge. And that's an example of things that I know I was able to take advantage of and was able to bring here. I think, even personally, yes, certainly it's been less stressful for me here and less demanding on my time, though I'm always available and I'm always checking for emails and phone calls. It's not the same 365 day a year job that I had before. There is some opportunity to have a little bit of downtime here, and I have family time, which I can honestly tell you I did not have the last 3, 4, or 5 years I was with the Chicago Police Department. So it's been a benefit for me personally, and I do believe for the university and for this department, there's been some benefits with my having come here as well.
Those crisis intervention classes, are they at the police academy that the officers over here take?
Yes, but it's not. It's 40 hours. It's a full week, and it's not Chicago Police Department that do the training. There are a few Chicago Police instructors, but the majority of the instructors are from outside the department. They're from mental health providers in the city that do the vast majority of the training to give officers an understanding of signs to look for that someone is in need of mental health treatment, and how to approach and talk to someone that is having a mental health crisis. So it like I said, it was voluntary. It's supposed to be voluntary because the training is meant for people that want to take the lead in those types of situations, and is not meant to be mandatory, because it's something that you want officers to want to do and not force them to do. But all our officers volunteered, and it took a couple of years to get them through the training after I got here, but we got them all through. So it's been one of the benefits, and there are others, but that one I like because I just think it gave us some additional tools and resources that I don't think they would have had I not been here.
How many officers do you have in the department over here?
So with me, we're right now with 23 sworn officers, but we also have a contingent of unarmed security guards. We have, separate from that, we have a full-time staff of telecommunicators, which answer the phone and, will dispatch the jobs and the assignments. So we have a full-time staff of telecommunicators, and we have administrative staff. We have a couple administrative staff members that do, all those administrative matters and key control. And then this semester we'll be back to one student employee. We always try to hire one student employee, and they do a lot of research stuff for us.
Okay. Well, Chief John Escalante, Chief of Police at Northeastern Illinois University, thank you so much for joining us at Wizard and giving us some insight about what you do for the university and insight as to your career.
Well, thank you for having me. It was great to be here, and again, hope to see more people on campus take the time to say hello.
Absolutely. Thank you, Chief.
Thank you.